The Andy Poland Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Poland Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
All right, now we're in gear on a Tuesday. Rain throwing me off a little bit today. Mike Cal will be in for Tony at 11 o'clock. People who know me know that I am habitually early. My time pretty much operates on Lombardi time. If you say to be there at 9, I'm there at 8:45 at least. So I'm really baffled by this story from last night. Minnesota Timberwolves playing the Portland Trailblazers. And Timberwolves star Anthony Edwards wasn't there for the opening tip-off. It's not that he wasn't in the arena. It's just that he wasn't out on the floor when the game was about to start. And so, actually, the Timberwolves had to take a delay of game violation. I don't know whether that was a free throw or whatever it is. I guess it's considered a technical foul. But they couldn't find Anthony Edwards to start the game. So it turned out that he was in the locker room just doing extra warm-ups. He likes to do a lot of resistance band work in the locker room. And so they finally found him. They got him out on the court. Only, 35 seconds had elapsed. He checked in with 11:25 left in the first quarter, ended up scoring 13 points in 35 minutes. And the big thing was that they won the game. Minnesota won the game 119 to 114. But, we've had players who have been late to games before. There's a pitcher who pitched for the Braves going back 40 years ago. He'd just been traded there or just been brought up, I forget, but got lost going to the stadium and missed his start. Those things have happened. And you have, players who have issues and they show up late for a variety of reasons. In this case, he was there in plenty of time. He just said that he was warming up in the locker room and, quote, lost track of time. So that's first for me, that the guy was in the arena in plenty of time to start the game. It's just when the game started, he wasn't out there. I wonder about this, too. Shouldn't there be an assistant coach who looks out on the floor during pregame warmups and says, hey, our star, Anthony Edwards, he's not out there. Maybe we should go find him? Did they just assume that he was going to be ready to go for the opening tip? It seems to me that before it got to the point where they had the opening tip for the game, that somebody should have checked around and looked for it used to be that you had one assistant on the bench. And when Red Auerbach was winning all those championships for the Boston Celtics in the 1960s, it was Red's team. He was the coach. He was the GM. He was the assistant coach. He was everything except the trainer. So the traveling party for the team was the players, the trainer, and the coach. That was it. You look on an NBA bench now, there's like 6 or 7 guys, and sometimes there isn't even enough room for all the assistants to sit on the bench. They have to sit behind the bench. Somebody's got to be responsible for accounting for the players, especially the star player, Anthony Edwards, and say, we need to go find him because this game is going to start in 3 minutes, and we don't have him. So that's a first for me. All right, back to our regularly scheduled program, which is the obsession over which quarterback the Commanders are going to take at number 2, if they stay at number 2, or will they move up and get Caleb Williams, or will they, in fact, look at the Bears and say the Bears are interested in Jayden Daniels, and we need to have Jayden Daniels, so we're going to trade up to make sure that we get Jayden. I mean, it's crazy. And then Drake May, who some say is the best quarterback in the draft, and others say isn't even first-round worthy. Who knows? He may wind up at number 2. He may wind up at number 3. He may wind up at 35. Who knows? But this is the waltz that we'll be doing here for the next 5 or 6 weeks. Adam Schefter, who is an insider, talks to people every day, doesn't just throw stuff against the wall in hopes that it sticks, threw out this possibility yesterday, which I don't think many people have been talking about, especially with the long walk in the desert for a franchise quarterback here, other than the great rookie year of RG3. Hadn't been much since Mark Rippon won the Super Bowl MVP. Some good years for Kirk Cousins, true, but there hasn't been that guy in a long, long time. it would seem that in a quarterback-rich draft, there's no way that Washington is trading out of number 2 to go down. But this was Adam Schefter yesterday on the Pat McAfee show.
I think Washington's going to be open to anything, including moving back in the draft. So there's going to be a team that doesn't get Kirk Cousins, and it certainly sounds like right now Kirk Cousins will have as his primary two options, Atlanta and Minnesota. Maybe Washington jumps in.
Whoa.
Maybe.
Whoa.
Yeah, maybe Washington jumps in. Maybe there's another team, but I think the two primary suitors for Kirk Cousins I would expect to be Minnesota and Atlanta. There's only one Kirk Cousins, so he goes somewhere. What does the other team then do? Like if he goes to Atlanta, I wouldn't be surprised if Minnesota tried to move up in the draft and tried to make a play up for a quarterback. But then you're going to have guys like Justin Fields out there, Russell Wilson likely out there. You know, Russell Wilson had the 1 year where he gets tarred for that 1 year in the bad Broncos year where they wound up firing Nathaniel Hackett. And he's still coming off a year last year where he threw 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and you're going to be able to add him without compensating Denver and at a very low rate for this year, which makes him, I think, more attractive to another team. So there's a whole host of options, but I always come back to the quarterbacks. That's my default.
And as far as Russell Wilson goes, we'll spend some more time on him. He's going to be released by the Denver Broncos as they get off the hook for a guaranteed contract in 2025. They're still going to owe $39 million, but they're off the hook for 2025 on him. And as Schefter said, somebody could get him on the cheap. I don't think it's going to happen here, but just think 2 years ago, Washington was willing to give up the same thing that Denver did and sign him to that contract if they were able to get him. And Russell Wilson looked down his nose from Seattle at Washington and said, yep, no, not going there. Want to go to Denver. He goes to Denver, and it's a complete disaster. Gets Nathaniel Hackett, who had been the offensive coordinator in Green Bay when Aaron Rodgers was there, and he thought, okay, I'll just become Aaron Rodgers in Denver. That didn't work out. Sean Payton comes in. As Schefter just told you, the stats weren't that bad, but the marriage apparently was bad because on his way out the door on social media yesterday, Wilson thanked just about everybody in the organization, including the cafeteria workers, and didn't thank Sean Payton. So that tells you something there. As far as the Kirk Cousins factor here, I don't think he's going to wind up back here, but we're in that big speculation period where anything is in play. And if you do want a veteran quarterback in here, he is a very good veteran quarterback. I don't think he's a fit for what Cliff Kingsbury wants to do. Kingsbury has always had running quarterbacks, and a quarterback who's going to be 36 years old coming off a torn Achilles, I don't think is going to fit into the plans well. But he is in play, and it also ties into what the Bears may be doing if they're going to trade Justin Fields, and it seems certain that they're going to do it. Now, there's been a kind of a monkey wrench thrown into their plans because the Caleb Williams situation at the Combine where he refused to take a physical, it means that the Bears won't be able to give him a physical until they talk to him, and that's not going to be until the 20th of this month. They had hoped to bring him in today for his interview. They wanted to get that out of the way. Like if they had any doubts about Caleb Williams at 1, they wanted to get those out of the way today and then get busy and trade Justin Fields. But they have not been able to do that. As far as what they have been able to do on Caleb Williams, Albert Breer of SI.com writes this, that they did check with people who played with him. They also, again, tried to push it up, the interview, so it could happen today. But as he says, in the end, Williams and his team decided to move things around rather than shuttling the quarterback to and from California again in the midst of preparations for his March 20th pro day. The Bears will host Williams in Chicago shortly after that instead. So we're looking at another 2.5 weeks now. And as Breer writes here, it's not practical for Chicago to wait until mid-April when the spots available for veteran quarterbacks across the league have been filled to trade Fields. It wouldn't allow for the Bears to maximize Fields' value. It also wouldn't be doing right by Fields, which is what Chicago GM Ryan Poles told the media that he wants to do. Now, as far as what they did in the background work so far, they did interview Cliff Kingsbury for their offensive coordinator job, mainly, sounds like, to find out more about Williams. I think that's really what they were after. I don't think they were interested in hiring him. And this is what Breer says Kingsbury told them. He described the player as beloved by his coaches and teammates, and he also gave the Bears very real insight into Williams' father and how involved he was. The quarterback's dad, Kingsbury told them, was sharp and someone that Williams leaned on a lot business-wise, but the father left the football part to his kid. Kingsbury explained to Chicago he saw the dad maybe once in the last year at their practice facility. So that's kind of a relief because the dad factor was sounding bad, and there have been reports that the dad did inquire about the possibility of the kid owning part of a team, which is not going to happen, and we saw what happened here with Dwayne Haskins. I think his situation was complicated by his dad. I know that the RG3 situation was really made into a mess by his dad, so I would want to avoid that. That would be a big relief for me. And then more on what happened at the Combine with him from Breer. On Wednesday at 10:40, second to last window of the night, Chicago had its formal interview with Williams in the suites of Lucas Oil Stadium. Ryan Poles was joined by 5 people who were the point men in the evaluation process: Coach Matt Eberflus, offensive coordinator Shane Waldron, passing game coordinator Thomas Brown, and assistant GM Ian Cunningham, plus the team president Kevin Warren. What they saw from Williams in that setting was an easy confidence and a player who was not concerned much about what other people thought of him. The last part is key because the Bears have tried to drill down on making sure the person they pick can handle the pressure of the Chicago spotlight. For now, though, while Poles has positioned the Bears to trade Fields in the coming days, he's also open to waiting a bit if it takes time for the quarterback market with Kirk Cousins and Baker Mayfield as headliners to develop. The key is the team has flexibility. Chicago will be realistic in finding the right return for the 11th pick in the 2021 draft. It's probably not getting a first-rounder, and it hasn't been working off any assumption that it will. Instead, the Bears have looked at historical data points as models. The other thing is, a week from tomorrow, I guess a week from tomorrow, free agency officially opens, but the legal tampering period starts Monday. So the deals are going to start to pop Monday and Tuesday. We're going to start to find out about these things. And I would imagine Baker Mayfield and Kirk Cousins will be off the market quickly. And it's quite possible they're going back to their same teams. They just signed Mike Williams in Tampa. I would think that Baker Mayfield's going to go back there, and maybe Kirk Cousins is going to draw some interest on the open market, but sounds like he's willing to take a hometown discount to play in Minnesota. So I would expect it to go that way. As for Washington, if they stay at 2, what happens there? Who do they take? Do they take Drake May, or do they take the Heisman Trophy winner from LSU, Jayden Daniels? And this is Dan Orlovsky, who seemingly is saying to Washington, hey, if Daniels is still on the board, go for it, because he actually likes Daniels better than Williams. This was yesterday on the Rich Eisen show.
I don't like to say anything about these guys unless I've watched all of their snaps in totality. The only 3 that I've done in totality are Caleb, Jayden, and Drake May. After watching all that, I would take Jayden number 1. I think the 3 things that make it stand out for me are, number 1, I think his ball placement versus man coverage is the best in the draft. We see that in the NFL on a consistent basis. We're starting to see more and more of it. This is why I say, Rich, every quarterback in the NFL is accurate. It's the NFL. There's 60 people on the planet that have those jobs. Everybody's accurate. Accuracy is throwing it to your guy. Ball placement, throwing it away from the defense. He's got the best on tape. Number 2, evaluating this class is the hardest since I've gotten into this job for me, because it's either things are made so difficult by some of these offenses that are, and I know Kurt had mentioned this, it's so difficult to evaluate, like, what is this? Or they make it so easy. So the number 2 thing is, when your offense and you as a pass game generate these explosive plays, what does it actually look like? Are you getting 4 or 5 20-plus yard completions in college football because you threw a bubble out to the right, or it's some trick play, or you ran around for 9 seconds and threw a ball down wide open to a guy in the NFL? We know that's not real life, or downfield, excuse me. So what does it look like? And he's got the most Oh, I see you throw that post cross concept, or I saw you throw 4 verticals and you rip that seam. Most transferable stuff to the NFL. And then I think the third thing is pocket peace. I think Caleb has tremendous pocket reaction, and his pocket suddenness is really good. Jayden has just this calm, this peace, this subtlety movement wise that I think is different than the others as well. So I would go Jayden 1. I think that he plays faster, both mentally and physically. You know, I so often 1, 2, 3 ball comes out of his hands. We know that, you know, and I think one of the things that I've learned, Rich, over the past couple of years of just doing this with the college kids and, you know, watching the NFL guys is, you know, kind of the state of the NFL quarterback wise is you really win making a ton of pars and then occasionally dropping birdies or an eagle. That's what Patrick did this last year. And I think Jayden does that as well. And then I would do Caleb too. Tremendously talented. I see some of the stuff that I talked about with Jayden. The ball placement versus man isn't always perfect. Now, I don't think USC was super talented on the outside. I thought their offensive line was poor. You don't have a lot of examples of like 1, 2, 3 ball out or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ball out and the suddenness and the quick twitch of that and the you know, the shortstop play of that. Not a ton of examples this year on tape. Again, I think it's a little bit because of what's around him. Tremendous playmaker. You know, I think, Rich, I'll say this. I think he's a tremendous talent. That Notre Dame game is a tough game to look at. You know, real NFL defenses. Al Golden dialed it up for Notre Dame, and you know Notre Dame created some pressure, and I think that's a game where if I was Chicago or Washington or New England, I would want that would be the first game I would watch with him, and I would sit there and just watch that with him, and I would kind of take in everything that he's regurgitating.
So takeaway from Dan Orlovsky, if Jayden Daniels is still on the board at number 2 and Washington is sitting at number 2, they should run. Don't walk to the podium with the card for Jayden Daniels. And you match Jayden Daniels with Cliff Kingsbury, who's done great things with running quarterbacks, and even with Kyler Murray, who's small. Murray, you know, there was a big holding of breath at the combine to see if he measured 5'10". This guy's 6'4". Jayden Daniels is 6'4". He's a little slight, but I think you got to like his chances with Cliff Kingsbury, what he's done with mobile quarterbacks before. So we'll see, and we'll see what the Bears do. I mean, the Bears may want him too, and so the waltz that goes on as to, you know, how they would entice Washington to trade with them, or would they just take Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams then falls to Washington? If that happens, does he have a chance to become the first homegrown star? Kevin Blackistone has a column about that in the Post today. I'm going to go over that later in the show, but we'll see. I mean, if this is the thinking around the league that Orlovsky is giving everybody, even though Caleb Williams, we've heard for months, slam dunk, number 1, next Patrick Mahomes. Here's a guy who studies film, and maybe there are others who look at this the same way and say, yeah, the better quarterback is going to be Jayden Daniels. Who knows? Coming up, we'll get to what Jay Billis says about college basketball and how it's really been virtually ignored throughout this season. We'll deal with that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
You know, until yesterday, the most famous tearful retirement news conference in Philadelphia history happened 35 years ago when Mike Schmidt, in the middle of the season for the Phillies, announced his retirement on the road. I think they were in San Diego, and got about 2 sentences out, broke down in tears, and walked away. It lasted less than 40 seconds. Yesterday, 35 years later, Jason Kelce did a tearful retirement news conference that lasted more than 40 minutes. And we will get to some of the highlights of that coming up in just about an hour. He was sincere. He was truly emotional. And he was all Jason Kelce. And we'll talk about what he said and also where he stands among centers. It's a position that doesn't get a lot of respect. And when you talk about the great centers of all time, they're not exactly household names, most of them. And Jason Kelce joins some of the best of all time, as he someday will be in the Hall of Fame after a 13-year career. Meantime, we move on with the rest of sports, such as they are. We got baseball going on, and, we've got some interest in what's happening in spring training, but we're still 3 weeks away from the start of the regular season. And there's college basketball, which has an odd season. It begins with games in early November. They used to start Thanksgiving weekend. That used to be the opening weekend of college basketball, and it had its place. And now it's been completely swallowed up by the NFL, not just the games, but the postseason, which now goes on an extra month. They used to wrap up the Super Bowl in mid-January. Now it's mid-February, so that eats up another big month of college basketball. So by the time we come out of the clearing of football, we go, oh, look at college basketball. Oh, there's only a week left before they start the conference tournaments, and then the only part we really care about is the 3 weeks in March into April with the NCAA tournament, and the only reason most people really care about it is because of the office pool. They don't see any of these teams play all year. Yeah, there's that. And also, I thought that with the NIL and transfer portal and guys sticking around college a little bit longer, we'd have some real marketable stars in the men's game. We really don't. The top player is Zach Edey, big plotting guy, 7'4", plays for Purdue, and may never set foot in the NBA. He may get drafted, he may get a look at, but he doesn't transfer to the way that game is played today. When 50 years ago, when I think college basketball was never better, we had real stars. We had Bill Walton, and we had David Thompson, and even here at Maryland, Len Elmore, Tom McMillan. We had great players in the cases of those two, Elmore and McMillan. They were playing their third year because freshmen were ineligible. Senior year, Bill Walton, same thing. David Thompson was in his second year, and he would have probably won a national championship the year before, but North Carolina State was ineligible for illegal recruiting of him. But here we are now, and the most talked about star in college basketball wears a ponytail, and that's Caitlin Clark. She is exciting. She is, people compare her to Pete Maravich, and she has now passed him in scoring, and she has a flashy game, and the fact that she shoots jump shots from the logo is incredible. I look at her more like Babe Ruth for the women's game. Babe Ruth really made baseball the national pastime. We had great players before him, like Ty Cobb, and guys who were stars back in the early part of the 20th century, and then Babe Ruth kind of took over in the Roaring 20s. But he was doing things that other people weren't doing, and at a time when the top home run hitter previous to Ruth had hit like 26, 27, he at 29 broke the record, and then went on to be the most celebrated baseball player. You can argue whether he's the best of all time, but he was a great pitcher who also was a great home run hitter. And, may be the best of all time. We don't know. But she's putting that game on the map. That's what she's doing to it. In the meantime, the men's game really seems to be suffering with the way football has chewed it up and the fact that we don't really have these great flashy players in the way that we had them in the past. This was Jay Billis yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show. He has kind of a different view of this. And he says, actually, it's not as bad as most people think.
Well, for a significant segment of the viewers' population, it is must-see TV. The ratings prove it. Like, it's not like our ratings are going down. That's not happening. And I get it. Like, we've become a football culture.
Yeah.
And so at all these different media companies, yours included, you cover football more than anything else. And you cover basketball more when we get toward the NCAA tournament. And that's fine. Like, my phone is a great example of it. Like, my phone rings off the hook for interviews from now until April, the middle of April. It doesn't ring as much during the regular season. It used to ring a lot more. That's because football is dominating that space. And it's dominated that space at my company. I think it is at yours. You look everywhere else, that's just the way it is. That's more popular. Like, we're into analytics too. And we know what people watch more than other things. I think at ESPN, I think this is right. We have more college basketball games on the air than anything else. And way more than NFL games. I mean, it's not even close. But we cover the NFL at a much higher rate, including during the offseason at a much higher rate than anything else. And that's business. So I'm not concerned about it at all. It's fine with me. You just have to deal with it. But coverage. How do you get coverage? The most I'm ever called is when somebody in college basketball during the regular season does something stupid. There's that court storming thing. It has very little to do with the play on the floor or the players or the coaches. It's really about controversy. But that's the way the media business has gone, and I'm fine with it. It's just the way it is.
But you have to admit, I mean, there's no star power in men's basketball. Like crossover star power. Like where you go, I mean, Zach Edey, all right, you can tune in. I mean, Zion 4 years ago, but, I mean, he's the exception here.
Yeah, that's kind of the point. But Caitlin Clark is the exception in the women's game. But the point is, what do? You have to have something like that in order to move football out for that small amount of time you get to talk about it. So I get that. I'm not concerned about it. It's not like the NBA is squeezing out football either, because it's not. And there are stars in baseball. That's not squeezing out football. We've got something in football that has sort of dominated our culture, and I have no problem with it. I'm not sitting here going, "Hey, talk more about basketball." I talk about it when it's time to talk about it. If people don't want to, if they'd rather talk about football, what am I going to do? I'm not going to stop anybody.
Best team right now is who?
UConn. They're the best team, and it's kind of amazing, Dan, that they had all those losses from last year's national championship team, and relative to the field in the last month or two, they're better against the field this year than they were against the field last year. People tend to forget that last year they were the best team in the first month and a half of the season. They rose to number 2, but they were the best team. I think most of us recognized that and said so. And then they went through a lull where they lost 6 of 8 in Big East play and lost in the semifinals of their conference tournament to Marquette. But when the tournament started, there was no question. This year, they're the recognized favorite, but they have competition. But because of the transfer portal, talent is more spread out. So we've seen a little more what people like to call parity in the game. And now we're saying it's going to be a wild tournament. Every time we say it's going to be a wild tournament, it's not as wild as we think. And every time we think we have it knocked, then it's wild. So I have no idea what's going to happen, and that's kind of delicious.
I think you would call last year wild. Jay Billis yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show. Florida Atlantic in the Final Four. You had San Diego State. I mean, these are not the traditional powers. Yes, UConn won it all, and UConn has won it all in the past, and they're a school that has cornered the market on basketball, both with women's and men's basketball. But the days of seeing the Dukes in there all the time, and North Carolina and UCLA and the Blue Bloods, we don't really see that as much anymore. I don't know whether that's a bad thing or a good thing, but what happens is you really start to get educated about college basketball in the late stages of March and early April. Like, all the stuff that happens before that is kind of irrelevant, right? I mean, when you come out of football where you've been totally wrapped up in everything that's been going on, you go, oh, there's college basketball going on. You don't really have to know much to get involved because you're just getting indoctrinated as most people are. Now, here's, I think, going to be more bad news for college basketball. We have the Super Bowl wrapping up in mid-February. The door is wide open to play the Super Bowl President's Day weekend. That is going to happen sooner rather than later. It's going to work out perfectly for the NFL because Monday will be a day off, so people will be more willing to stay up and watch the game and go to Super Bowl parties and all the stuff that goes with it. And I'm afraid that it's going to lead to an 8 o'clock kickoff too, so they can take more advantage of the prime time. But and they'll say, well, you don't have to go to work tomorrow. Well, some people do. Not everybody, takes off for President's Day. But The reason that this is all going to happen is they're going to have an 18-game schedule. They have 17 now. They have an option in the contract to negotiate 18 games. Well, guess what? They're going to negotiate 18 games. This was Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk on with Dan yesterday on that subject.
Well, the union has to agree to it, first and foremost, because the union initially didn't want 17 games, but once they developed the impression that the league would lock the players out to get to 17 games, then prior union leadership came up with a deal that was a win-win for the players. You look at where the salary cap is right now. That's one of the benefits of agreeing to play 17 games. This current labor deal goes until the end of the decade. I think that's when the NFL starts making the push for 18. And the reason that it hit my radar screen last week, I mean, when you're immersed in the NFL at the scouting combine for 4 or 5 days, you pick some things up. Andrew Berry, the GM of the Browns on PFT Live, said that they're proposing a delay of the trade deadline by 2 weeks, one to account for the 17th game and one in anticipation of an 18th game, which got our attention. I started talking to some other people, and they're like, yeah, it's just a matter of time before the NFL tries to get 18 games.
But it can't happen until the, 2030?
It can in theory. That's one of the things that I think becomes a misconception about the union NFL relationship. They can come up with any agreement they want at any time for anything. They can have side letters. They can rip up the CBA and write a new one whenever they want. They basically did it for COVID. They came up with a new CBA within the CBA when they were trying to figure out how to deal with the financial losses and the impact there. They could do it whenever they want. But I think the best time to fully squeeze the players to go along with it, if you're the league, would be when this CBA expires. But you can't rule out the possibility of an acceleration. They want 18. They've wanted 18 for years. Yeah. They settled for 17.
But guess what? When the owners want something, they get it. And the way that they get it is the same way they got 17. As Florio said, there was a threat to lock out the players, so that got their attention. And then when it came down to negotiation, they just threw another $1 billion at them, and it was fine. And salary cap went up $30 million per team this year, so there's more money for everybody. And the league wants more product. And there's talk now of expansion fees. If they can get a team in for an expansion fee of, what could it be, $5 billion? People would pay that. We just had a team sold for $6 billion, team here. So why wouldn't they do that? And if you just had a playoff game that was sold to Amazon for $120 million, $110 million, whatever it was, over $100 million, aren't you going to want to create more playoff games? You probably are. Now, the big problem I have with 18 games, and this is really a problem I've had with 17 with the way the team has played around here, Washington's season pretty much ended on Thanksgiving. That blowout loss to the Cowboys was it. Jack Del Rio got fired, and they still had, another 6 weeks of football left, including the bye. So you're dragging around a carcass of a season for way too long. That's the real downside of it. The upside for the NFL is more money, more money. More money, more games to bet on, more product, more television product, more things to sell to places like Peacock and Amazon. So it's a foregone conclusion as far as I'm concerned. It's going to be an 18-game schedule. It's just a matter of when it happens. Florio says maybe they wait till the end of the deal, which would be the end of the decade, but there is a clause in there that they can open this up, and I would think that they would. I mean, it's 2024. You got 6 seasons before this runs out. Why waste that time? Just get more games in. It's going to happen. We're going to have an 18-game schedule. And as I said the other day, the USFL, you look it up, when they started in 1983, they had an 18-game schedule. And it was because they wanted to make sure that they had plenty of games for television. They made a nice deal with ABC, and that league might have survived. I don't know. But Donald Trump wanted to merge with the NFL and tried to make that happen, forcing it to become a fall league, which was really never going to happen. They went to court, sued the NFL for antitrust. They won, but the damages were $3, and that was the end of the USFL. Anyway, moving on to the current NFL and the discussion of what to do about the kickoff. And we had 13 kickoffs in the Super Bowl, 0 returns. So it's become pretty much of a dead play. If you missed this last week, Troy Vincent, who is the vice president of football operations for the NFL, was on Pro Football Talk, and they got into the discussion of rule changes and ones that could be made, may not be made. There's like, for example, when you fumble out of the end zone, it's called a touchback. And everybody screams about it when it happens. It's unfair. It's unfair. Guys at the 1 yard line, he fumbled out of the end zone. The other team shouldn't get the ball to 20. Well, Vincent said they looked at this in the competition committee and they said, well, it doesn't happen very often. When it does, it is what it is. We're not changing it. But the kickoff is different. They want to get more excitement back into the game, and they're trying to make the game safer at the same time. So this was the discussion that Vincent had with Mike Florio and Chris Sims last week about possibly changing the kickoff.
What they've researched from the CFL, the USFL, the XFL, what has worked in other professional leagues around the world, or what hasn't worked. And it seems as though there's a combination of a little bit of XFL, a little bit of USFL,
yeah,
that they could bring into the play that can make it interesting. What I find to be fascinating is they potentially can put in another 1,500 to 2,000 plays. You just start talking about that's a dead ceremonial play. We saw that.
Right.
You go from 38% returns to 22. But to talk about setting up a play that potentially can put in an additional 2,500 plays, that's exciting.
And you mean that through the kickoff?
Through the kickoff.
Just the different ways they could do things, game plan. Hey, I could do this, right?
Yes.
And that was more through the XFL prism, or
it's a little bit of the XFL prism.
What is the USFL prism? I'm not sure if I know.
You're lining up 10 yards apart.
Right.
Balls kicked.
Right.
No one moves until actually the returner, the receiver receives the ball. There's a huge penalty if there's a touchback. So they have elements of forcing a return.
Right.
So there's some of that. My challenge always, I go back to, this is how I got into football. I earned a scholarship at the University of Wisconsin because of special teams play. In 19, we removed the elements of the play that was significantly dangerous.
Yeah, right.
The wedge blocks, the short sets, the cross blocks.
Right.
You can see some of those elements possibly returning in some of that setup.
I would think so.
Yes.
The XFL formula for sure, right? We've kind of broken that down where you're going to have guys, what is it? They line up at their own 20-yard line, basically. You're going to have guys pulling and
but they're only 5 yards apart. They're only 5 yards apart, though. So I always thought, Troy, one of the big concerns was you have guys that get to a running start, maximum speed, and you get that collision, and that's the greatest chance for a catastrophic injury. When you have guys 5 yards apart, you're not going to have the same impacts.
Correct. But potentially the guys that break free, our skill position players, they're completely different than those of other leagues. You make a guy miss, now you have that defender on a runner quite quickly.
Right.
But when I think about it, as they were explaining it to the committee, I started thinking about Devin Hester. And that, with this kind of, because it's really now it's one line of defense.
And once you break it,
once you break the crease, bye-bye.
Yeah.
So it was exciting to hear some of those elements. They meet tomorrow, Saturday morning as a full group. And the expectation is that we'll have something formally in writing so that we can discuss in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, that's later this month. That's Troy Vincent, Vice President of Football Operations, on Pro Football Talk last week. The follow-up on this is Mark Maskey's story in the Post today, and I'll just read you a couple of paragraphs here. He says, the NFL wanted to reimagine the kickoff this offseason in perhaps its last best attempt to keep the play in the game. The league's rule makers are trying to make the kickoff both safer and relevant, a balance that they have been unable to strike in previous efforts. The part of that process is just about done. League representatives, members of the NFL Competition Committee, and special teams coaches from several teams are applying the finishing touches to a proposal for an XFL kickoff model that, if approved, would take effect next season. That's next season. So here's how it would work. The kickoff model that they've used in the XFL, they probably won't call it that because they don't want to give credit to another league, but the kicker would line up alone on his side of the field, probably around the same spot that they do right now, the 35-yard line. The other members of the kicking team would line up as far down the field, 5 yards apart from blockers on the returning team. That setup would eliminate the issues that lead to such violent collisions and produce such high injury rates under the traditional kickoff alignment. So you have now, there's a picture, I can't show you this obviously on the radio, but you got the two teams. You got the kicking team and the receiving team. The blockers are lining up only 5 yards apart. There are two returners deep. There's two of them. And then there's the kicker, who's far behind his teammates as they kick off. The proposal might allow the returning team to have as many as two members. It perhaps would require the ball to land between the goal line and the 25-yard line. There would be a severe penalty for kickoffs into the end zone or out of bounds, with the ball perhaps being placed at the 30 or 35-yard line for a touchback. So what you're doing is, what they're hoping they're going to be able to do here anyway, is that they will be able to make the kickoff safer, increase the number of kickoffs, because it was a great Super Bowl, but 13 touchbacks is basically a dead play in that game. 13 of those plays in that game were basically irrelevant because the ball was kicked out of the end zone. If you kick it into the end zone for a touchback now, instead of it coming out to the 25, as they've changed that rule in the last couple of years, used to come out to the 20, now comes out to the 25. Now it's the 35. And so you can take your chances that you're going to be able to make a tackle inside the 35-yard line. I think there's a greater chance of that, and that would be something that would encourage teams to actually kick the ball off to create a kickoff and for the returning team to take it. The fair catch really didn't have much of an impact this year, where you could get a fair catch inside the 25 and get it out to the 25. Didn't seem to me anyway, anecdotally, that made much of a difference. Last offseason, the proposal for that didn't make the play safer. Players did make the play safer. They say players suffered only 8 concussions on kickoffs last season, down from 20 in 2022. But the health and safety officials attributed that 60% decline almost entirely to the sharp reduction in kickoff returns. As you heard Troy Vincent say, they went from 38% down to 22%. So there has to be a way to actually create kickoffs, but also at least make it seem like it's being safe. Now, there's also this thing, and this is another crazy part of this, which could almost turn this into a farce, and that's the onside kick, which has also been virtually eliminated from the game because of the way that they don't allow for extra blockers on the side of the field. There was only one successful onside kick recovered this year, and it was done by the Denver Broncos against the Washington Commanders in that wild game where the Commanders came from 18 down, take a big lead, and almost lost the game, as you had Denver with a chance for a 2-point conversion at the end, which fell short. So they had all those elements in it, and was forgotten is the onside kick. That was the one that was recovered in the NFL this year by the Denver Broncos. Now, the onside kick, one possibility would be to require the kicking team to declare its intention, at which point the alignment would revert to the traditional kickoff setup. Another approach could be to allow the kicking team to attempt to convert a 4th and 15 or 4th and 20 offensive play to try and retain possession of the ball. You've heard that before, that rather than kick off on an onside kick, hey, just give us a shot, 4th and 15 or 4th and 20. Maybe you start from your own 25-yard line. It's not here where exactly where the ball would be lined up. Proposals in previous years for 4th and 15 or 4th and 20 for the onside kick have gotten nowhere with the owners. There is a chance this kickoff proposal could face similar opposition. Takes 24 votes to get it through, but what they did was they basically took the kickoff out of the game this past year, and they want to do something about it. The Devin Hester part of the argument is interesting because Devin Hester is in the Hall of Fame, and if you go to this current kickoff format, you're never going to have a guy that's going to be a Devin Hester. Now it could in some way help Brian Mitchell. Because and it was felt that when Hester was voted into the Hall of Fame that was going to help Mitchell, because that opened the door for specialists like that. And look, Devin Hester may be the best return man of all time. I think he was the most feared. But, what you saw from Brian Mitchell in the 10 years that he played here, and then he played 3 in Philadelphia and one with the Giants, he was more than just a kickoff return guy. I mean, he was a really good running back, and they used him in spots, and he had a couple of really big games for Washington when they had injuries. And, of course, he was the quarterback in the Body Bag Bowl, the game where the Eagles knocked everybody out, including the 2 active quarterbacks that Washington had. So he had to finish up in that. So I think, and also given that he's number 2 to Jerry Rice in all-purpose yards throughout his career, he's got to get some consideration. But the kickoff to me has always been a very exciting part of the game. It's something you look forward to, and just like on any given play, it could be broken for a touchdown. Same with that, and what they have now just isn't working that way. So they're balancing trying to stay safe with also keeping in the game. One of my favorite kickoff moments was that the St. Louis Cardinals had a wide receiver named Mel Gray, really fast, involved in one of the most controversial plays in team history, where prior to instant replay, clearly the ball was knocked out of his hands in the end zone by Pat Fisher, and they still called it a touchdown, and the Redskins lost to the Cardinals in overtime. But this was a game where they're lining up to start, and the kick returner for the Redskins was Herb Mulkey, who didn't go to college, famous free agent signing by George Allen at an all-comers tryout at Georgetown University in 1972, I believe. And so he's lining up for a kickoff, and Jack Whitaker is doing the game, and he looks at the roster, and back to return for Washington is Herb Mulkey from No-Knee College. That was none. He didn't go to college. He returned the kick for a touchdown. The ensuing kickoff to Mel Gray, that was returned for a touchdown. That's the way to start a football game. Won't have that now, and with this new kickoff rule, we'll see. But this will be something if they vote it in. And again, it's going to take 24 owners, 24 of the 32, to make this happen. But if they vote it in, they'll try it on an experimental basis for 1 year. And if they like it, they'll keep it. If not, it goes away. Coming up, Jason Kelce cries his way through his farewell news conference in Philly yesterday. We'll go over the highlights of that and talk about where he stands among all-time centers as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So here is the Caitlin Clark effect. The Sunday game against Ohio State, where she broke Pete Maravich's all-time NCAA scoring record. It drew 3.4 billion viewers. It was the second most watched college basketball game of the season, men's or women's, and it outdrew Warriors-Celtics on ABC. Well, that was a joke of a game. Boston won that by 52. But the point being is this is women's basketball. Women's basketball outdrawing most college basketball games this season, men or women. She's the Babe Ruth of the sport. She's really turned it around, and we'll see what effect she has when she gets to the WNBA, as she is going to go to the Indiana Fever. They have the number 1 pick in the draft, and also there's talk of what may happen down the road when like Angel Reese gets into the WNBA. Will you have this Magic Johnson, Larry Bird type of carryover that you had from that famous final in 1979? That was not a great game. Indiana State lost to Magic Johnson and Michigan State. Magic had a much better team around him. I think it was like a 12-point game, something like that. And Bird didn't really even play very well. But the buildup of that was so huge that it remains, I guess, share-wise, the biggest NCAA championship game in history. And we're going back, 45 years on that. All right. Prior to yesterday in Philadelphia, this was the most famous tearful retirement announcement in Philadelphia sports history, when in 1989, Mike Schmidt, suffering through a tough first part of the season with the Phillies, called it quits during a road trip in San Diego.
Some 18 years ago, I left Dayton, Ohio, with 2 very bad knees, and a dream to become a Major League Baseball player.
I thank God that the dream came true.
That was it. He couldn't talk anymore. He was done. So what was that, 23 seconds there? That was the tearful news conference that had remained part of Philadelphia sports lore. It has now been unseated by what Jason Kelce did yesterday in announcing his retirement from the Philadelphia Eagles, a 13-year NFL career that began as a sixth-round pick in 2011. And he was really much better at the end of his career than he was at the beginning of his career. He was an All-Pro in 6 of his final 7 seasons, 7-time Pro Bowl pick, one of the most durable linemen, too. He played in 193 games, started all of them for the Philadelphia Eagles. And he grew up in Ohio, played multiple sports, and was good enough to play, probably not basketball, not big enough to do that, but he was apparently a hell of a lacrosse player. But football is what drove him, and explained that yesterday as he talked through the tears of what was a 40-minute news conference in Philly.
I've been asked many times, why did I choose football? What drew me to the game? And I never have an answer that gets it right. The best way I can explain it is what draws you to your favorite song, your favorite book. It's what it makes you feel. The seriousness of it, the intensity of it. Stepping on the field was the most alive and free I had ever felt. There was a visceral feeling with football unlike any other sport. The hairs on my arms would stand up. The hairs on my arms would stand up. I could hit somebody, run around like a crazed lunatic, and then get told, good job. I loved football, whether it was in my backyard with my brother, on the playground with my friends, or suiting up on Friday nights at Cleveland Heights High School. I loved everything about it. Although I hadn't met him yet, Jeff Stoutland often shares a quote his father would tell him. More often than not, the easy way is the wrong way. Football was hard, much harder than any sport I had ever played, physically and mentally. In most other sports, I was bigger, faster, stronger than everyone else. On the football field, those traits were matched. On the lacrosse field, I felt like LeBron James. On the football field, I was Billy Hoyle. I loved the challenge that football was. The joy of winning, the agony of defeat, the anxiety of the unknown, and the camaraderie of my teammates.
Yeah, that's he was emotional. Stoutland is the strength coach that he said played a big role in his career with Philadelphia. This is how he came into the league. Remember, he had gone to the University of Cincinnati as a walk-on linebacker and was converted to center. Good enough to be drafted, but not until the 6th round. But still an emotional day as he talked about it yesterday.
I won't forget the call I got from Andy Reid on draft day and my father rushing into the room. With tears streaming down his face as his son's dreams had just been realized. It had just been announced on TV I had been drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles. And I won't forget 2 years later, that same man and my brother receiving a call. And him being drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs. This time, the tears streaming down both my father and I's face as my brother had just realized his own. I won't forget the first time I saw Jason Peters do a one-on-one pass set with Trent Cole and being amazed at the speed, balance, and power I had just witnessed. It reminded me or looked like a grizzly bear wrestling a panther. It was so impressive it made me question if I was good enough to play in this league. I watched the next couple guys go and thought, okay, I can do this.
He figured, that's Jason Peters, that's one thing. Average offensive lineman, that's another. Now, he only played 2 years for Andy Reid. Andy Reid was fired after the 2012 season, and he was replaced by Chip Kelly. And I'd kind of forgotten about this game, but this was Jason Kelce yesterday reliving the start of what was the 2013 season and this new coach with this new hot offense that he's bringing from college.
I won't forget Chip Kelly's first game as Eagles head coach against the Washington Redskins. We ran close to 50 plays in the first half. We were so tired, but it didn't matter because they couldn't stop us. The NFL had never seen something like this before. I remember all of us thinking after that game, this is going to change the NFL.
Which it did not. They made the playoffs the first year. The Eagles were 10-6 in their first year under Chip Kelly, lost the playoff game. They went 10-6 the following year, missed the playoffs, and in his third year, 6-9 with a game to go, he was fired, and that was the end of Chip Kelly in Philadelphia. Got one more year in San Francisco as a head coach there. Didn't do well. But the game that he's talking about, this is the opening game of the 2013 season. This is Robert Griffin III coming off that huge knee injury that he had in the playoff game against Seattle, the whole summer of all in for week one and the Gatorade commercials and the whole deal. And we saw Griffin. We went, oh boy, that's not the same guy. Philadelphia was leading 33-20 late in the game. And RG3 threw a couple of late touchdown passes, both of them to Leonard Hankerson. Remember Leonard Hankerson? Philadelphia won that game 33-27. So that was the start of the Chip Kelly era, and you thought, okay, maybe he's got something there that's going to revolutionize the game, but he really didn't. He gave Shady McCoy 31 carries in that game. He had 31 carries for 184 yards. And they were just running play after play after play. And I guess it eventually wore down the offense as well as the defense, and it had its day. But that was the year in 2013 when Chip Kelly came in, and really that was the year that Kelce really began to blossom and went on to start 156 consecutive games, which is the most consecutive starts for an Eagle ever. This is last thing I'm going to play from him. And I think when you talk about playing in Philadelphia and what it means to be an athlete there, this is probably as good a description as I've ever heard. Kelce talking about the 13 years that he wore the green and how he interacted with a fan base, which is, I think, unique among sports fan bases across the NFL.
It's only too poetic. I found my career being fulfilled in the city of brotherly love. I knew that relationship all too well. Some people struggle to play in this city. They can't handle the booze, the media, or our fans. Consider it a great blessing to play in the most passionate sports town in America. The sense of urgency in this city to win has pushed our organization, has fueled it to take chances, fix problems, and work tirelessly in an effort to win. At times, you hate it as an athlete, especially those new to our city. But when you've been through it enough, you learn to appreciate it. No one celebrates their own like the city of Philadelphia. Athletes become demigods in this city, even ones whose deeds span decades before. The Eagles are the number one ticket in town, the most talked about thing at nearly every moment. With that amount of attention, you better be ready to overcome the lows that will happen and be ready to persevere in the face of the criticism. Yes, they will let you know when you are not performing well. Every time. But they will also love you if you show effort, aggression, desire, the will to fight. They will love you in this city if you love it the way you love your brother. You will be loved by going above and beyond to show that you care, because they care. They've been caring for generations in this town about this team, And they aren't about to accept a bunch of excuses and soft-ass nonsense representing the name on the front of the jersey, something they've invested their entire lives in. If you don't like what the fans and media are saying as a player, it's very easy. Love them, treat them like your brothers, and go out and play your butts off. Wear your heart on your sleeve, and I guarantee you change those narratives.
And so that's another Ohio athlete, just like 35 years earlier, Mike Schmidt walking away from the game with tears in his eyes. Jason Kelce walking away with tears, but remembering fondly the Philadelphia fans. And it's not for everybody. Bryce Harper's apparently doing very well with them, and Jason Kelce obviously did, and retiring with one Super Bowl ring. Now, here's the question. Where does he stand among all-time centers? It's not a position that we debate often. And in fact, in this town, we had a really incredible history of centers from the 60s through the early 90s. Len Haas was the starting center for Washington, missed only a couple of games, really durable, from 1964 to 1977. I think he died within the last year. He was replaced by Bob Cousile, who lasted really only about 2.5 seasons. He was replaced by Jeff Bostic midway through the 1980 season. Bostic had been an undrafted free agent out of Clemson by Philadelphia. Philadelphia had signed him, but they cut him. He winds up in Washington as a long snapper and eventually takes over the starting job at center and stays there through the 1993 season. He was the last of the original Hogs still standing. So a 30-year period, 1964, 1993, 3 centers, Len Haas, Bob Cousile, Jeff Bostic. None of them are in the Hall of Fame, and none of them have really gotten serious consideration, though you might look at Haas for that because he made a bunch of Pro Bowls, but he did not get in. Pro Football Reference has a metric for measuring play, and it's a lot of it's based on number of games and seasons played, which would kind of eliminate a player that many feel was the best center who ever played. The problem is a devastating knee injury ended his career after only 8 years. But Dwight Stevenson, who played from 1980 to 1987 for the Miami Dolphins, is regarded by many as the best who ever played. And he made 5 straight Pro Bowls from 1984 to 1987. But when you talk about longevity and guys who played the position for a long time, Jim Otto is right up there, played 163 games at center, 12 Pro Bowl selections during his 15-year career, and first-team All-Pro in 10 of his first 11. Started 210 games, never missing a game. Mike Webster played forever, 17 seasons for the Eagles, for the Steelers and the Chiefs, 245 games. Wound up with what he was actually patient 0 for CTE, and they believe it was from the repetitive hits. Jeff Saturday played 211 games in 14 years, winning a Super Bowl with the Colts in 2006. Final year with the Packers in 1930, and at the age of 37. Mick Tingelhoff played with the Minnesota Vikings 64, started in 64, 240 consecutive games, never missing a start during his Hall of Fame career. First-team All-Pro from 64 to 69 with the Vikings. Kevin Mawai, regarded as the best center of the 2000s, made the All-Decade team with the Pittsburgh Steelers, played also for the Seahawks 16 games in 16 seasons. I'm sorry, he did not play for the Steelers. He played for the Jets and the Titans, 16 years, 241 games. Tom Nalen, long time with the Cleveland Browns, all 14 of his years with them. And then he played 194 games, made 4 consecutive Pro Bowls. Jason Kelce, we just talked about, 193 games in 13 years. Dermontti Dawson is one I'm thinking about with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Made the All-Decade team of the 1990s, 184 games, entire career with the Steelers. Len Haas, who we mentioned, never selected as a first-team All-Pro, though, but made the Pro Bowl 5 times in his 14 seasons in Washington. Played his entire career there, starting 194 out of a possible 196 games. So there are names there, maybe not household names. When I was just thinking off the top of my head, that the centers that came to mind were Jim Otto, obviously, Webster, of course, and Saturday mainly because of TV. These others, not quite as known. Mawai was president of the Players Association for a while, so he was up there. And of course, I remember growing up that Len Haas played center for Washington. I was a really bad high school center, but I wore number 56 because that's the number that Len Haas wore. So we'll see. Jason Kelce will get into the Hall of Fame, it appears. Otto is in. Webster is in. And I think that's it, right? Is Dermontti Dawson maybe in? Jeff Van Note is another one. Played forever with the Falcons. 18 years, 246 games. Last game was at the age of 40. So debate amongst yourselves. Who's the best center of all time? All right, coming up, Mike Callow is in for Tony, and I will be back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.